The latest incident between Verstappen and Norris in Austria brought back a lot of flashbacks when it comes to the racing style of the three-time world champion, who has been dubbed to be the main driver to blame for how the race ended up for both of the drivers. However, with a lot of data evidence and even more importantly with the stakes that are involved in 2024, are we going to see a lot more of this racing? And should we blame Max for the type of racing he conducts after many were defending him for so long back in 2021? It's safe to say that racing in Formula One is back, and this time it's Verstappen who is being analysed as to whether or not he is bringing his old pre-2022 style of racing now that there is a genuine concern that he doesn't have the best car on the grid, and McLaren have made the greatest step in the development war. What is mostly to be analysed after the Austrian GP is how Verstappen defended against Norris, with the primary points being moving under braking but also not leaving a car width space before the entrance of turn 2, which are mostly rules that have been introduced due to his previous reckless style of driving. But that version of Verstappen was the one with just a handful of wins, not 61 as he has right now, and definitely not without 3 championships behind his name. We've seen a massive change in his driving style during the race start. He doesn't attack aggressively like he did back in 2021 because he now understands that he has the best car and can therefore make up for any lost ground without a great effort. That was, however, until the last couple of races where the field has been levelled between them and McLaren, and with Mercedes occasionally joining the talk with a pole position along with Ferrari, Verstappen might have resorted back to his old ways of driving. To put things into perspective, the Dutchman wasn't happy with how Norris tried to pass him, saying that a dive bomb isn't the best way to complete an overtake on a driver. This is quite an interesting take from a driver who earned his first championship thanks to a dive bomb itself in the last lap in Abu Dhabi, although the conditions at that turn were much more different and allowing for a dive bomb to be applied. When talking about the overtake tries on Norris, one in which the Brit went off the track and Verstappen had to avoid contact, the Dutchman said, "I felt like sometimes these dive bombs, you are so late on the brakes that one time you go straight, one time I had to go around the sausage curb, otherwise we would have touched as well. So I think it's also just the shape of the corner which provides these issues sometimes. I've had it also the other way around, so it is what it is." The genuine reaction here is that Verstappen understands that when you do not have the best car in your hands or when you are forced to defend, there are no limits as to what tools you'll use. We've seen it in 2021 many times, especially in tracks like Jeddah and Interlagos, where Hamilton had to avoid contact in order to save his race. This also happened a lot in 2022 with Leclerc as well, as these two drivers were always backing down from a contact and waiting for a better moment to pass if it was ever presented to them. That, nevertheless, doesn't hide the fact that Verstappen's racing manners still need some polishing, and although we perceive him as the perfect driver, there are clearly some signs that he's cracking under pressure, which could be poised upon him due to the fact that he doesn't have the fastest car on the grid right now. If we go back a bit in 2021, there aren't many situations in which we can see Verstappen folding under pressure, and let's take a look at the Silverstone GP, where he didn't back off a proper fight against Hamilton when entering the corner named Copse. On the other hand, in the closing stages of the race, when Leclerc saw that Hamilton was very close to him at this particular corner, immediately lost control of the car and went wide of the track, opening up the door for Hamilton. A similar thing happened back in 2023 at the same track when Verstappen was P2 and chasing Sainz, who made a mistake seeing how close Verstappen was behind him before the Dutchman went on to pick up debris and ruin his race. This wasn't a common sight that we've seen with Verstappen back in 2021, which goes to show that indeed he is one of the best drivers when being put under pressure. It's just his driving style that needs a bit of polishing in order to avoid more trouble in the quest for the 4th championship. After all, if we're to talk about Verstappen and his driving style, we can't help but bring some great names into this conversation, such as Michael Schumacher and Ayrton Senna. Although they're constantly praised for their greatness, it's also widely known that they weren't the cleanest of drivers, similar to how Hamilton raced against Alonso back in 2007 and Rosberg back in 2016, which just goes to show that in order to be one of the greatest in the sport, you have to stand out with your tactics and be constantly on the edge, just to prove to the rival that you're not just a driver disguised as a sitting duck and lose a position whenever you're in an inferior situation. Obviously, Max said this to himself, and when the Sky F1 reporter asked him as to why he couldn't have let Lando go and satisfy with P2 and avoid any contact, Verstappen's response was golden. "I could have stayed home and not come to the race at all. I came here to win, not to finish second." This is definitely a mindset of a champion, but it's safe to assume that he won't always have the luck of finishing the race after these contacts, similar to how he didn't have Hamilton's luck back in Silverstone in 2021 when the Brit managed to finish the race while Verstappen hit the wall with a force of 51G. If we're to analyse the situation in Austria once Verstappen started to report issues even before the second pit stop, it was obvious that Norris started to cut down from the lead once Verstappen started to struggle with the hard compound tyre. The disadvantage was visible. He was mounted with 4-lap-old medium tyres while Norris had brand new ones, and with the slow pit stop of the 3-time world champion, when both of them exited on the track, the difference was 3 seconds instead of the 8 seconds before the pit stop entrance. However, Norris managed to get into the DRS zone much quicker than anticipated, partly because of a lockup of Verstappen on those used tyres, which comes naturally as he's trying to attack at a great pressure and therefore braking as late as possible, forcing him to make a small mistake. To say that he is flawless is definitely not a true statement, because he has been defending quite strongly against a 7-time world champion back in 2021, and the last driver that you wanted to see in your mirror back then was Hamilton, who was on a path to win the 8th record-breaking championship in his career and climb at the top of the mountain of F1 greats. This seemed like a perfect plot for people to cheer for Verstappen and his aggressive driving style and label it as brave, but as long as he's doing it now from a leading perspective with the best team on the grid, it's labelled as controversial and weak, which is why we are noticing some bias from the fans and the experts towards Verstappen. If you were to look at this clip and how Verstappen completed this clean overtake on Sainz, who was also moving under braking, you could very easily compare and see that Norris had different options on his hands. It's just that he chose not to yield under pressure and not avoid contact. Max was definitely at fault, which is why he received a 10-second penalty, but in times like this when racing for wins can be so hard, especially with Verstappen having the mentality of anything below P1 is a loss, could be a perfect recipe for an amazing 2024 season ahead of us. Christian Horner himself said that fights like this should be expected a lot in the future, especially because Norris is in the phase of learning how to attack and fight Verstappen on pure merit. And when talking about this to a greater extent, the team principal of Red Bull said, "I understand Max and Norris have spoken already. I don't think there is any issue. Certainly from Max's side, he is not going to change. There is an element, I think, of Lando learning how to race Max, and they are discovering that. Inevitably, there is going to be more close racing between the two of them as the cars look so close over the forthcoming races. Max is a hard racer. He is probably one of the hardest racers on the circuit, and everybody knows that if you are going to race against him, he is going to give as good as he gets." With all this in mind, do you think that Verstappen needs to change or adapt his driving style to avoid accidents like the one in Austria? Or do you think that Norris will learn how to race properly once he gains more experience with the car and Verstappen's antics? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and once you've done that, have a look at the video that's appearing on your screen right now.